This video was sponsored by Squarespace. From websites and online stores to marketing tools and analytics, Squarespace is the all-in-one platform to build a beautiful online presence and run your business. Hello everyone, and welcome to part 3 of the Bridgman series. Now, you don't have to watch this series in order, but I do suggest watching the first video before moving on to the other parts, because it covers a lot of the fundamental principles that we'll be using. So we'll start by looking at the upper arm. Connecting the arm to the trunk of the body is the triangular-shaped scapula bone. This bone actually floats above the rib cage, but is held to it via some muscles and ligaments. Then, the only bone of the upper arm, the humerus bone, inserts into that cylindrical socket on the lateral portion of the scapula. The junction of these two bones creates a ball and socket joint that allows your arm to rotate in many different angles. There are two processes that stick off of the scapula. That would be the acromion, which is the larger one, and the coracoid, which sticks just above the glenohumeral joint. At the elbow joint, we see the humerus bone becoming wider and has two protrusions on both the lateral and medial side, which are known as the lateral and medial epicondyles. The elbow is then completed by the two bones of the forearm, which are the radius and ulna. On the front of the upper arm, the bicep is the most prominent muscle. It's known as the bicep for the two tendons that it has going into the shoulder joint. The tendon on the outside, which wraps around the arm bone, is known as the long head, and then the short head attaches to the coracoid process, which I mentioned earlier. The muscle then inserts into the radius bone, and when it contracts, it acts to bend the arm. Deep to the bicep is an often overlooked muscle known as brachialis. This muscle aids the bicep in contracting the arm. Then, attaching to the brachialis as well as that coracoid process is the Coracobrachialis. It's not always the easiest to see, but in a muscular person, it's pretty obvious in their inner arm. When I draw the surface anatomy, I like to just indicate the shadow shapes that each muscle form would be creating. This way it looks more true to what you'd see. In addition to the muscles I've already mentioned, we can see a few others here in the front view. The triangular-shaped deltoid muscle overlaps a lot of the shoulder joint, with the exception of the acromion process. And since the tricep is more massive than the bicep, you can actually see it poking through from the back of the arm. Another prominent landmark of the arm is the medial epicondyle of the humerus. As I mentioned earlier, the humerus bone has those two prominences at the elbow, and because of the absence of muscles on the inner part, you can see it on the surface. From the back view, we can see the spine of the scapula more clearly, which ultimately becomes the acromion process that we talked about earlier, as well as the large olecranon process of the ulna, or as normal people call it, the elbow. As far as muscular anatomy is concerned, the backside of the upper arm is comprised mostly of the triceps muscle. As you could probably figure out based on the name, the tricep has three sections, with both the long head and lateral head being the most prominent. The long head originates on the scapula, and the lateral head on the upper humerus bone. A third portion, the medial head, lies deep to the other two, and is most obvious right by the elbow. The three sections then converge to one tendon that attaches at the elbow and is used for extending the arm. As Bridgman's book demonstrates extraordinarily well, the volume of a muscle may have very distinctive planes. So as the body of the muscle turns away from the light source, there will be a shift in its value as it's cast into shadow. Bridgman also uses overlapping lines to exaggerate the difference between the body of a muscle and its tendon. You can see that the lines from the common tendon of the tricep go inside the body of the muscle, clearly articulating the difference between those. When we see the bones of the arm in side view, we can see all of the same familiar players we've seen thus far: the scapula, humerus, radius, and ulna. And a few things that you'll notice is how that acromion process lies above the glenohumeral joint, and you also see how prominent the ulna is at the elbow, and how it engulfs the humerus bone. From the side view, it's easy to see how the bicep and tricep have two contrary functions. Contraction of the tricep pulls up on the ulna, which extends the arm, and contraction of the bicep pulls up on the radius, which bends the arm. The deltoid muscle, which is oriented perpendicular to both of these muscles, inserts right between them. Another prominent muscle we can see here is the brachioradialis. This muscle originates on the lower third of the upper arm and then inserts on the radius. When it comes to drawing the surface anatomy, you can see that I'm going to subdue a lot of those details and do less outlining of the muscular shapes. I try to focus on the shadow shapes that would be created by each of these forms by giving it a directional light source. I'm not too focused on the rendering, but just enough that you can get an idea of where the light is and feel the volumes to each of these masses. Again, overlap is going to play a big role, as you can see the brachioradialis overlapping that biceps tendon and the deltoid muscle overlapping both the bicep and tricep. It's very useful to show contrast in your muscle shapes based on whether or not the muscle is being stretched or flexed. When the arm is extended, the tricep is flexed, so you can see I give it a rounder shape that bulges in the upper third of the arm, while the bicep is a bit more linear and flat. The opposite is true when the arm is flexed. The tricep is going to be much more flat, and then the bicep a bit rounder and compressed. From the inner view of the arm, we can see the Coracobrachialis and the Brachialis muscles much more prominently. We can also see the inner portion of the tricep, which takes up a lot of volume of the arm. This muscle is overlapped by the latter portion of the humerus bone, so again we can use our lines to demonstrate that by allowing them to go inside the body of the muscle. I'm going to draw the inner arm flexed and then stretched out, and I think you'll see how important it is to really modify those shapes depending on if a muscle is contracted or not. And you'll notice in a very muscular person that the biceps tendon as well as the coracobrachialis tendon stands out quite prominently in the armpit. Then, because the forearm muscles are being compressed at the elbow, they tend to have this squashed shape to them. Now in the stretched arm, you'll see that that bicep completely flattens out. The brachialis and coracobrachialis muscles aren't always going to be this prominent, but I happen to be studying from a model with very low body fat, so you can actually see all the individual muscles there. Alright, let's move on to the forearm. The forearm is comprised of two bones, the radius and the ulna. The radius originates at the lateral side of the elbow and travels down towards the thumb side of the hand, with the ulna being on the medial side, going down to the pinky. When your palm is oriented face up, the two bones are parallel, with your thumb being on the outside. But when you overturn your palm, the radius actually rotates over the ulna. On the lateral portion of the forearm, we see the Brachioradialis muscle, which starts on the upper arm and spans all the way down to the radius. A short muscle known as pronator teres starts at the medial epicondyle and ends on the upper radius, and it's responsible for pulling the radius bone over the ulna. The inner portion of the forearm is taken up by a group of muscles known collectively as the flexors. They originate at the medial epicondyle and travel all the way down to the palm to flex the hand. Although there are many muscles in this group, they present as one mass on the surface, so artists will often group them together. The last third of the forearm is just taken up by the flexor tendons and the bones of the wrist. Once again, this surface anatomy is going to present as a more subdued version of this, since there's going to be fat and other connective tissue that sometimes obscures the individual muscles. This is where studying from reference comes into play, because you won't always know how it's going to present on the surface. Now let's have a look at the forearm from behind. Both epicondyles of the humerus as well as the olecranon process are going to be very prominent from behind. The positioning of the muscular anatomy is largely dependent on these features. On the inner portion of the arm, we can see those flexors poking through from the front, and emerging from the lateral epicondyle is a new group known as the extensor muscles. Sitting above and in front of those extensors is that brachioradialis muscle we talked about earlier. A group of muscles that extend the thumb originate in the latter third of the forearm. They're not the most prominent of muscles, but I tend to use them as a drawing landmark. On the surface, you can see that the ulna vanishes in between the extensors and the flexors. As I mentioned earlier, in order to overturn the palm, the radius bone has to rotate over the ulna. This can be a really confusing process, but it's important to remember that the radius is always going to be on the thumb side, and the ulna will always be on the pinky side. It's also going to be the radius bone rather than the ulna that rotates. When this rotation of the radius bone occurs, it's actually going to pull the brachioradialis with it. This creates a very distinctive twisting in the forearm. Lastly, I just wanted to show some of the form constructions that Bridgman uses to simplify the anatomy. These images are directly from the book, so if you want to study them, I highly suggest checking them out. But I think he really elegantly shows how the muscles interlock with one another and how their planes turn. Knowing these planes is going to be really useful in predicting shadow shapes. Alright everybody, that is it for this week. I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsor, Squarespace. If you're looking to build an online portfolio, consider using Squarespace. They have beautifully designed templates that have been crafted by Squarespace's world-class design team. Adding images into your website is as simple as dragging and dropping them from your desktop into your browser window. Any images hosted on Squarespace can be edited directly within your browser using Squarespace's built-in image editor. Crop, resize, rotate, adjust the brightness, and much more. Head to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/moderndayjames to save 10% off on your first purchase. And be sure to use the coupon code moderndayjames. Thanks again for watching this video, and if you enjoyed it, please click like and subscribe with notifications on. If you'd like to support the channel, you can do so by heading to patreon.com/moderndayjames. There we have many great perks like access to Gumroads at a discounted price, group lessons, and one-on-one lessons. Take care everybody, and I will see you in the next video.